Hello everyone, this is East Dragon, and welcome back to another episode of Fire Emblem Heroes. In this episode of the Damage Calc series, we'll be taking a look at damage multiplier specials and dealt damage. If you haven't figured out already from the past few episodes, working with the damage calc formula is relatively straightforward because all the actual concepts to compute the damage are the same in terms of rounding up or rounding down and whatnot. The only difference is what we're working with. So say for effective damage in the weapon triangle, we're working with attack. In the case of modifiers to the mitigation stat, we're working with defense or res. Boosted damage specials, we're working with either attack, speed, defense, or res, depending on the special. And so now with damage multiplier specials, we are working with damage. In particular, we're working with the damage we get after working through effective damage, the weapon triangle, modifiers to the mitigation stat, and boosted damage. So after all of that, we get a damage value. And that number has to be non-negative. So you can't have a negative damage going into... You can't be doing negative damage going into the damage multiplier special. So say in some scenario, a unit, after doing all those calcs, you come out to a negative 23 damage. At this step, in the damage calc formula, you actually bump that negative 23 all the way up to 0. So if you have any number that's not positive, it's going to be 0 at this step. So it could be, I don't know how you would get minus 2,356 damage, but if you did, it would just go all the way up to 0 damage. So let's start off with an example of Glimmer. So let's say at this step a unit is doing 31 damage. For our first method, we can just multiply this by 1.5 and then round down. So in this case, the 31 damage gets increased to 46 damage. And the alternative method is to multiply by 0.5, round down our answer here to 15, and then add that to the original amount of damage to get the same answer. Of course, this should look familiar to effective damage, and various shenanigans you might do with the weapon triangle. It's just that the multipliers can be different. And so let's move on to Astra. For an example, let's do a slightly larger amount of damage. Let's say 92 damage. So Astra increases the damage done by 150%. So if we're doing the first method, we actually multiply by 2.5 because 100% plus 150% is 250%, and that translates to a multiplier of 2.5. So for this first method, in this particular example, there's no decimals to round down here. We just have a nice 230 damage. Using the second method, we multiply by 1.5 to get 138 here. Again, we would round down here in this scenario, but there's no decimal places here on our calculator shown, so there's nothing we need to do here. And then we add that 138 to get the same 230 damage. And of course, there's specials like Deadeye, where it just says doubles the amount of damage dealt. What it's saying, or done, same difference. In the case of like Deadeye, the percentage is 100%, so the corresponding multiplier is 1. So the second method is kind of redundant for this one because, of course, say you're doing 53 damage and you're proccing Deadeye. Then for the first method, you just multiply by 2 call it a day. You of course will never need to round down your answer when you're multiplying by 2 in any of your calcs with Deadeye, so that's pretty nice to get 106 damage here. And then the second method, there's no point, but you would multiply by 1 to get 53 again, and then add it to itself to get the same amount of damage. So that's pretty straightforward for damage multiplier specials. You just have to keep in mind you can't be going into this step with negative damage because of this next section where we talk about dealt damage. So for dealt damage, in the case of units like Brave Erica with Moonlight Bangle, where when she procs a special, she deals damage equal to, I believe, 50% of the foe's defense stat. In that case, it's all the same thing as calculating for boosted damage specials, but you're just working with dealt damage. It's the same calculations all the way, so let's just do some random examples here. Let's take a unit with 43 defense, and let's just hypothetically say there's a unit that gets dealt damage equal to 40% of the foe's defense. So that 40% we can translate to 0.4 as our multiplier, and we'll round down our answer. So this hypothetical unit would get 17 dealt damage. And of course, there's units like Flying Nino of Giga Excalibur, Carlo of Vassal's Blade, where sometimes the dealt damage depends on the difference between the unit stats and the foe's stats, and it's some percentage. So in the case of like base Giga Excalibur or Vassal's Blade, it's 70% of the difference between the unit speed and the foe's speed, with a max of 10. So keep in mind, if you get a number larger than 10, then you have to dock it down to 10. But let's say Flying Nino, it has 8 more speed than an enemy. We can just multiply that by 0.7 for that 70% and round down. So we just get 5 dealt damage from Giga Excalibur there. Of course, I'm talking about this not including her refine and whatnot. So just keep that in mind. All the concepts are the same across all the weapons and skills that grant dealt damage. It's just you're working with dealt damage and not boosted damage. So again, from previous episodes, the relevance of what I talked about earlier this episode about changing the negative amounts of damage to 0 is that if you don't do that and you go into your boosted damage and dealt damage calculation with a negative number, in particular for the dealt damage, you're going to get the wrong amount most of the time. There's some weird examples where things work out, but let's say hypothetically we have going into the damage multiplier special step, we have minus 27 damage, and we just don't move it up back to 0 because we forgot to or something. And say there's a unit proccing Wodal Plus and Glimmer. We would apply the Glimmer first, of course. We would do our usual method. You can see where this is going. And so we would round down, which in this case goes to minus 40. And then we would add the 10 damage from Wodal Plus, and we get minus 30, which is clearly incorrect. Because you can't do negative damage in this game because it evaluates to 0 every time in every case. The correct way, of course, is instead of working with that minus 27, we work with 0. So when we apply that Glimmer, 0 times 1.5 is still 0. And then we add our dealt damage in this case from our Wodell plus, and then we get the actual correct damage of 10. The overall damage that's actually done to the enemy unit. Unless there's damage reduction. So that's gonna be it for this episode. In the next episode, we'll be discussing damage reduction a bit more in depth than what we've been doing previously. And again, things are going to be quite similar to what we've seen in previous episodes. So until then, thanks for watching. As always, this is Ether Dragon, and hope to see you all next time. Bye.